disastrous.
I was an executive in an insurance company when Banda Aceh occurred on Boxing Day. And I remember having this urge to help humanity. 260,000 lost their lives in that one event. And it was on such magnitude, I thought, I've got to help. And I did a quick stock take of my skill set, and I had nada. I had nothing that was going to add value. And it sat with me really uneasily for a couple of months. And I thought, I've got to change what I'm doing. And that's when I set about to become a firefighter.
This is Elizabeth McNaughton, and welcome to Disrupting Disasters, conversations with disaster experts about how we can do disasters differently. For this episode, I spoke with my friend Megan. She is the Deputy Commissioner for Fire and Rescue New South Wales based in Sydney. I love this talk. Megan gives you the feeling that no matter what happens, she's got this. We could all use a bit more of that. I love her practicality, her open-mindedness, her empathy, and her ideas for reinventing service delivery in fire and rescue and the broader emergency management sector. We talked about leadership, her experiences on the ground, so many nuggets and amazing ways of thinking and being. I'll be pondering this for days to come. She's a champion for change in her industry, and she really stands in her power. So inspiring to me. So let's get into it. Isn't it interesting? It seems our biggest challenge is how we can get our collective groove on.
I know. I think it's got to do with ego, really. Everyone thinking they've got the right answer. This is the way we've already done it. And if we can park ego, think of the collective why, which is our citizens, community, whoever, whatever term we use, I think that dispels all of this competition. Recently, I was able to go to Washington, US, and represent Australia at the World Fire Congress. And the conversation, 56 countries from around the world talking about what are their 5 biggest issues. And it was comforting that no matter where we sat on the economic scale, whether we were from Ghana, El Salvador, the Netherlands or Australia, we all had the same 5 kind of issues. So that was comforting. What was discomforting is none of us have nailed it or have found the answer. So what the World Fire Congress basically was saying, well, we can't solve this individually. So how do we do it collectively?
This is the way forward.
I think so. And I don't know why, Elizabeth, it's a challenge to some in my industry to be collaborative and not have all the answers. It should be a comforting thing that we seek answers from others. And I think that's who we need to be for the future. Someone who doesn't have all the answers, that doesn't have to take control, that can embrace a spontaneous volunteer instead of trying to control the spontaneous volunteer.
I've been thinking about control in these settings, right? It feels like a bit of a delusion that we can control like a catastrophic event, or that we can control climate change, or, how people think or respond or come together. Or do you think we need to reframe command and control?
Look, I think command and control has a really positive aspect in the middle of chaos. Because basically what we're trying to do is bring some sort of coordination, some sort of calmness to chaos. So being methodical, having chains of command, having procedures when things are really unstable brings a level of confidence and comfort, both to the organisations responding and the community. What we do have to understand is we don't have total control or total command of a situation. If we can bring some sort of calmness to a part of the chaos, I find community can get about their business. Because when you talk about the value we add as agencies, as first responders, community will always be their own first responder, right? For those first hour, couple of hours, sometimes we can't get to people for days, depending on how widespread it is. The first thing you ever hear from community is, where is everyone? Why are we here by ourselves? So we play a huge role in coming in and providing support so community can get on and do their thing. And I think the longer we take to be there for community, the harder it is for them to recover because they felt isolated for too long.
Yeah, I like this coordination and calm. I'm liking those two things. Just see that's very powerful.
Yeah, it is. And, I feel blessed that I was able to respond to the Christchurch earthquake very early in my career. And I always reflect back on my 14 days in Christchurch. We flew in 24 hours after that massive earthquake. And to be coming into your country, 73 of us, not knowing what we were going to, and then the first thing we're greeted with at the airport as New Zealanders are leaving to get to safety and we're flying in, the whole airport stopped and clapped us coming in. And we all were really emotional because we're going, wow, we haven't done a thing yet. But the fact that we were just turning up made such a huge difference. And that was very humbling to me. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of responsibility on us to be here and do our thing.
Yeah, there's something so powerful in that, showing up for each other when things are at their hardest. Thinking about our careers, 2 disasters have been really profound in shaping our big why. The tsunami, the
Boxing Day
tsunami, and then the Christchurch earthquakes.
Pivotal in my career, pivotal.
Yeah, me too. It's like these big events can really change and shape you. I'm really interested to hear how that's been for you because we share that.
Yeah. Well, I was an executive in an insurance company when Banda Aceh occurred on Boxing Day. Gee, that's 19 years ago. Oh, no, how did that happen? And I remember having this urge to help humanity, like 260 odd thousand lost their lives in that one event. And it was on such magnitude, I thought, I've got to help. And I did a quick stock take of my skill set and I had nada. Like I had nothing that was going to add value. And it sat with me really uneasily for a couple of months. And I thought, I've got to change what I'm doing. Corporate insurance is not going to be my driver. And that's when I set about to become a firefighter. I was playing rugby and at a high level and loved teamwork. And so I was physically fit into team and I thought, the fireys are going to be a really good fit. And so I set about to do that and then really focused on how do I get into the humanitarian side of firefighting. Queensland is known as OZ1 and it's qualified under the United Nations to respond to earthquake, just like New South Wales, where I am now, has OZ2. And 7 years, almost 2 months difference, I was being flown into Christchurch. I'd had a career epiphany, acquired a set of skills that were going to add value at times of crisis and flipped it around. Now, that time of 2011, in an 8-week period, I was in Toowoomba for the inland tsunami where multiple people lost their lives. I followed that up with helping coordinate the flood response in Brisbane. I flew into Townsville just before Cyclone Yassi crossed the coast. And then I ended up in Christchurch. Now, those 4 disasters happened within an 8-week period and I was at all 4. Where would my career have gone if I didn't have that experience and that knowledge that I gained just so quickly in 8 weeks?
And so tell me more about that experience going from like a desk job to a very much on the ground job. It's wild.
It was wild, but I've always been really practical. I had a dad who was out west, helping establish farming at a very young age. So he and I were always in the tool shed together and doing things. So I was comfortable around equipment. As I said, I was at a really good point in my rugby career representing my state, and so I had good fitness. I just slotted in really easily. It was, I think, where I was meant to be. Much to my mother's concern at the time, because I remember her saying, well, what am I going to tell people? You're becoming a firefighter. And I said, well, it's most admired job, Mum. Like, no one's going to be cursing at me. Like, they'll be thinking it's a great move. I've never looked back. It's the best decision I've made in my life.
How do you think your childhood or where you grew up has shaped you in your career?
I don't think we're born with leadership skills. I think it's what we observe around us. We grow into our leadership. And I think my dad has been really significant in who I am as a leader. Mum and Dad came from working class backgrounds, like lived in housing commission homes. They were known back here. Government provided housing, and Dad had spent time in a children's home because his mother was a single mother and very poor in the 40s, and had to put two of her children into care because she couldn't afford to feed all four. So Dad had just a beautiful take on life, and it didn't matter whether you were a millionaire or you were on government subsidy, you were important. And he was probably the first example I ever saw of someone that was just present in conversations. When you were talking to my dad, that was all he was interested in. As I've progressed through my career, I've realised that it's not important whether I'm talking to someone at the same rank or someone who's important in government. Everyone deserves 5 minutes of your time. Don't wipe anyone. And also, most of the great ideas that I've enabled as I've become a senior officer are not my ideas. They're people's ideas from the front line. And I'm in a very privileged position where I can enable their great ideas and help them come to fruition. So I think Dad has played a big role in that.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I think, presence is something we are so missing in today's world and society. That ability to really help people feel so seen and so heard is really, really powerful. Have you noticed with really great leaders, even if they only have 5 minutes, they make you feel like they have all the time in the world for you?
Totally. It's a gift that you can give to people. It costs you nothing, but it can make people feel so, like you said, heard. Every second Monday, I go to at least 2 stations. Now, I don't have to. I'm not in charge of operations in my current role, but I just go and have a coffee. And I just hear what's happening for the crews on the ground. I pick up ideas about what equipment they're needing. I hear what's working, what isn't working. And every Monday afternoon, I email the people I've been with as a crew to say, it was great, thank you for your time. This is what I heard today. This is what I can do about it. So many times I get an email back saying, thank you for coming and listening. And I think, you don't have to thank me. This is what I should be doing as a leader.
But somehow a lot of leaders have missed the listening memo. Is that a nice way to put it, Megan?
How boring just talking the whole time,
Right. You learn nothing when you're talking.
Yeah. And God, I work with some funny people. Some of the visits, they give me energy because in New South Wales, we've got 24-hour shifts. So you're with that crew for 24 hours at a time. They know each other so well. And there's always someone making fun of someone in front of the boss, right? So, and it's just good humour. And I walk out of there going, we're a good space if our people are enjoying themselves at work.
Is there a stick-out funny moment?
Actually, one trip just cracked me up. In Newcastle, we have a crew that Two of the men have been on shift together for 26 years. And they're both still in the back seat. So they have been a working couple for 26 years. And it was like they were the two old men in the Muppet sitting up in the balcony. Oh, God, I had a good time. But they were graduating the academy like in the late 80s. So the humour they still had towards each other and the good spirit after 26 years. And I noted to them, I said, my God, that's longer than most of the marriages you hear about, So that really stood out for me.
I think too, they're so onto it as humour is the best coping mechanism for the really difficult things they must have seen over those 26 years.
Well, most first responders have that humour to cope with really dark moments. And it worries me when we try and super control that. I know we have to set standards that the community expects, but I'm not sure people who haven't experienced those dark moments understand the power of that humour. As long as it's not offensive, saying it out in public, I think there's a place for it. But like everything, there's a fine line. I'm really big as a leader to make sure the mental health piece is really well focused. People are comfortable putting their hand up when they're not doing well, encouraging team members to look out for each other and notice when someone's behaving differently or isn't present in their conversations. I think it's all of our responsibility about our collective well-being.
Absolutely. And because everything is becoming more intense, it's becoming more frequent, and it's demanding more of our people, I think about climate change in terms of that actually we're heading onto a climate frontier. This is uncharted territory. Our systems are set up for the past, and we're in this really interesting phase trying to figure out what the systems for the future need to be, how we innovate, disrupt, how we evolve. 26 or something reviews have come out from Cyclone Gabrielle saying that New Zealand's emergency management system is not fit for purpose, right? Like it's a pretty clear message. We knew that anyway. So it's this time of rapid change. And I think that is incredibly challenging for leaders, but also it's in a way inspiring to be of this moment. And, I have been in awe of you and your career for some time, Megan, visiting your fire station and hearing your stories over time. You are a change agent in many ways. You've never shied away from change or hard conversations and have held dreams and possibilities. And this is why I want to ask you about this, how you see us being able to change and evolve and rise to the challenges of the climate frontier and how you're thinking about that.
On a couple of levels, I don't think our staff and the people involved in disasters have ever had to deal with those concurrent consecutive events. I looked at Queensland's activity in the last 14 years, and they have averaged 10 to 14 declared events every year for 14 years. There's 120 odd events in a 14-year period. Australia last financial year, 71 declared events impacting 205 local governments. $6.2 billion in disaster relief funding, 53 million in government funding for resilience. Our people have no space to recover as humans. They're responding, coming back, the next event. In between events, they're doing their normal response, our BAU. Where's their headspace to decompress? Where's their space to regenerate? What are we doing as leaders in my industry to reinvent our service delivery? It used to be everyone's running at 100%. A disaster happens, we run at 120%. Well, that's unrealistic. in today's climate change. So how do we give our people perhaps 80% activity with surge capacity for disasters? Why are we the only industry in the world that has a static 24/7 staffing model? Why aren't we using machine learning to understand, like emergency departments, policing have done for years? You've got certain peaks and valleys of activity. So how are we using our workforce smarter and giving them relief and recovery? How are we embracing communities and allowing them to be their own first responders? How are we building that capacity? How are we setting expectations for community? I hate the word recovery because that's almost promising something communities can't have. They're never going to recover where they were post-disaster. How are we reimagining their future rather than recovering? These are all things we need to be asking ourselves and challenging ourselves. I guess rostering is one of the most tapped in conversation when you're talking to a frontline workforce, but they're the conversations we have to have. And they're the ones I'm not shy of talking about, saying, well, is this really feasible? This is the same staffing model and service delivery model from 140 years ago. There might be more of us, but it's the same model. Surely we can reinvent ourselves.
In our workshops, a lot of people ask, so why do some people grow from adversity, grow from these disasters, and others don't? And there's a number of reasons, but one of them is we're going from disaster to disaster to disaster, peak event to peak event to peak event, but we're not having that time to rest, restore, reflect, process, talk about it, and come back stronger. And so that, I think, is a big part of why we're seeing the churn and the burn and people becoming damaged rather than growing from these events, because there's a huge amount of growth that can happen through adversity and through these difficult times. And I'm interested in how you feel the events and your work has grown you, how it's been part of your becoming.
Yeah. I do think part of our recovery in my industry is reflection, and that's how I grow. I process really well. When I talk about processing, it's understanding what's happened to me. So if it's an adversity or if it's something didn't turn out the way I thought it would, I process it by saying, okay, well, what just happened? What are the pros? What are the cons? How could I have done it better? Could I have changed the outcome? And just have a really honest conversation with myself. And from that, I can identify gaps in my knowledge or growth areas, or I can say, there was nothing I could have done better to get a different outcome. And if that's where I land, I'm okay with that. I think it's a part of my mental fortitude and strength is that process, analyse, accept, then move on, not keep reinterrogating, thinking there's going to be another answer.
And I think that's where a lot of our people get stuck, is in the reinterrogating. And I think too, there's a part of emergencies that is really hard on our people is retribution. And we don't talk about that enough. When people get caught up in it, they think it's personal. It's all their fault and all about them. And I try and say, hey, this is part of emergency management and its culture as it is now. It's not helpful at all. It doesn't help us to learn and grow, but it's normal and not necessarily a personal thing at all. And so I'm thinking if you have any kind of message or process for people stuck in that bit.
I think we are very good at lessons identified. I see very few lessons learned.
Doesn't that drive you nuts? That so gets up my goat.
you could cut and paste, right? The 15, 25 recommendations.
It starts to hurt.
I was just reading a review recently, the South Wales Fire Service, yet another review into poor behaviour and culture in a fire service. And I went straight to the recommendations and it got me intrigued. And I went back and had a look at about 15 behavioural reviews of fire services, all the same recommendations. And I thought, a smart leader in this industry would never go through a review for bullying and harassment, sexual harassment, all the things that have come out, because they would go back, they'd look at those recommendations and say, oh, goodness, here's a recipe of how to avoid a review. Yet every year there is another fire service going through this. So, first of all, we need to provide a safe work environment for our people to know it's not retribution. We're trying to understand and identify lessons, whether they're good or bad. They should be positive and negative lessons learned. And then this is how we're going to deal with those lessons learned. We've got a system where we're going to apply them, adjust our behaviour, retrain people, so it'll never happen again. It's going to be a positive experience for everyone. Not make it about the person, make it about what process let that person down, what policy wasn't in place. And then as leaders of our industry, apply those lessons learned and look after our people by giving them the best chance of not repeating. So I think after action reviews, we must do. That's our commitment to improvement.
We can't afford not to do this anymore. Also, we need leaders who grow from each experience, because we need the deep experienced leadership to take us forward on the climate frontier.
And we need, as organisations, to own when we do wrong. And not wrong intentionally, but it wasn't our best day. We weren't as prepared as we should be. I see a lot of covering up and not taking responsibility. People talk about, oh, that was unprecedented. I want that word taken out of our language.
Please.
Because our job is to imagine the unimaginable. Our job is to be prepared for the worst day of someone's life. We constantly look backwards for lessons, but that can't be the only thing we prepare for. We need to be preparing for things we haven't seen before. It annoys me, that word, because it's, oh, that wasn't our fault. It was unprecedented weather. Well, come on. Seriously, people. Where have you not seen a change? We're getting bigger, longer, stronger storms. The same with wildfires. We need to be imagining the unimaginable. That's our job.
I love that so much. But there's something that stops us being able to do that, systems being able to do that. Like, New Zealand is horribly, horribly unprepared for catastrophic events. And yet we have the Alpine fault, we have the Hikurangi fault. I mean, these could be disasters that are, they are an existential threat to Aotearoa, to our country, right? And yet there seems to be this inability to have that foresight or to imagine that unimaginable. Having been involved in large-scale emergencies, I feel the urgency around this. But what is stopping us?
I've thought about this. I look at some of the people I work with, and their value as a practitioner in this field is based on their experience. So the longer you've been in the job, the more experience you've got, oh, you must be knowledgeable. So they are always looking backwards. I went to this job and this is what I did. So when we're talking about these unprecedented events, they have no context from the past to help them understand what's coming to the future. So I think we need to bring our people up into that futures thinking, because it's a skill set. Like, how do you take people from this context that they know and predict something based on a few data points about something they don't know? And that's where my industry has to grow, I think.
And also how we bring our young people to the table.
They're doing it already. They're so much better than
Right.
It's the young people that are thinking about the unimaginable.
Exactly. But they're not at the decision-making table or the discussion table.
They are if you're a smart leader.
I love it.
Yeah, they should be. Like when you're talking about futures, you need a cross-section of your
Yes.
organisation. You need someone who's just come out of the school. You need, someone who's been in the job 50 years. You need administrative people. You need accountants. You need all this wealth of thinking all in one room talking about what if.
I heard that described once as 3-gen leadership,
Nice.
which I thought was cool, right? Like the
Yeah.
3 generations around the table on any problem. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I think that could really be a practical, easy way of thinking about this.
Yeah. So I guess it's how do you celebrate the past and all the wonderful things we've done as fire services or response agencies and harness that knowledge, but not restrict it about the thinking of the future, balancing between the two.
Thinking of new initiatives, I remember when we last met, you were showing me some pretty amazing plans for a pretty cool truck. And I saw on LinkedIn that truck was on the road this year.
Yes.
So, yeah, tell us about that journey.
So we've got 2 trucks that we've done what we call skins. So we wrap the whole truck in a vinyl wrap. We've got a pride truck, and it's celebrating diversity and is a vehicle we use in the gay Mardi Gras here in Sydney, and it's got beautiful flag and inclusive colours all through it. We call it the pride truck. When it's not in the parade, it's out at the academy. So to me, it's a really important message for those coming into our organisation that this is inclusive. You now have our organisation's values, and this is who we are. Everyone has a place at the table. And then the second one we're really proud of is our deadly truck, I call it. It's our First Nations truck, and it's wrapped with some magnificent artwork of some of our firefighters who are First Nation people and have really put their heart and soul into some artwork. And we've got QR code on the back so you can find out about the artists. And it is our number 10 truck. It's sitting in Redfern, which is probably the most recognised First Nations community suburb in Australia. It's where self-determination really was born in the 70s, and our firefighters who are First Nation can ask to be rostered there. They drive around their community, and kids are looking at this truck, seeing a future for their careers. So, and both trucks can go anywhere for events. So say you're out in a country town, you can ask for those trucks to go out there for a major event. So, yeah, just little things, just so we reflect our communities.
I just love how you'll have a plan on a page and then you make it happen.
How privileged am I? Like, that's probably the best part about being in my position at the moment is, I spoke earlier about being able to enable good ideas, seeing a need for something and then helping people deliver it. Sometimes you just need a sponsor at a higher rank to help you get things done. And I'm very privileged to be in that position.
And what I am interested in is how those initiatives build self-belief. I have a lot of women in emergency management asking me about confidence or how to create more self-belief within themselves that they're in the right place, that they can do this job, that the system is for them. And I'm kind of, in a way, I'm always happy to talk about that stuff. But in another way, I'm a little bit disheartened that I've been 20 years in this business and I'm getting the same questions. So when I hear of your initiatives, I think about self-belief and building that. But yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts on this.
Yeah, we just got requalified under United Nations for our urban search and rescue capability. And it's a big 72-hour exercise, and people from all around the world come in as our classifiers to make sure we're at a standard that needs to be met. And it's really important now more than ever that we have gender representation on our teams that deploy internationally. So we had a team that just went to Turkey after their earthquake. So we made sure one of our operators spoke Turkish. We had 2 women represented because culturally to respect women who were injured, etc. So it's not we want gender equity, we need gender equity. It's how we service our citizens and our community. We don't have a huge ratio of women able to be deployed. So I invited 23 firefighters, female firefighters, who have all the qualifications to actually come into the pipeline to become part of the deployable team. I just invited them to come out for 2 hours with me. We'd have a bit of a presentation about what their careers would look like. I'd take them and show them the base of operations that was set up. We had a meal in the field, MRE for lunch. And it was just a chance for them to picture what their future could look like in this space. And all of them were hesitant to come because they felt they were being singled out as females. But they came anyway, which was great. But when we talked about that, you could see them all kind of relax and go, oh, thank God, we're talking about the elephant in the room. A lot of the men who put their hand up for this capability might have 70% of the skills, for example, and they go, I'm going to give this a go. This looks great. And then when I talk to the women, they go, oh, I'm just not ready. I haven't got 100%. And it was like, oh, come on, just have a go, And I think societally, that's how children taught gender-wise, have a go if you're a little boy or, let's be perfect if you're a little girl. And we've got to change that at societal level so women don't carry this perfection gene into their careers because that's what holds a lot of women back. So sponsor women, I think, is important. Help them have confidence when they don't until they build their confidence in their career. And advocate. Look at every policy. Some policies exclude women not through intent. It's been written by a man who didn't realise that line would discourage a woman. So you just have to be really cognizant and you've got to be at the table. We need women in higher ranks. There's a Champions of Change group that AFAC run, and there's not a female commissioner in Australia and New Zealand, but there's 5 deputy commissioners that could be at the table. So I've said to AFAC, why are we needing you to advocate on behalf of females in our industry when I can name 5 women who would all join me in leading this work? So we'll see what comes of that.
I think it's going to be like the plans of the fire truck, Megan. It's happening.
We don't need you to do it for us. We can do it with your support. How about we tell you what we need as a workforce? Here's some very talented women who can be at the table.
Pull up some chairs. You right?
Yeah.
They're easy.
Yeah, let's have a conversation. You don't have to have all the answers. Hopefully some of these leaders are listening now. There's an opportunity here.
Yes. And I'm curious who has or what, it could be people or a book or what has inspired you? What shoulders are you standing on? What helped you build your self-belief?
I have a broad church, so to speak. I like to get inspiration everywhere. Most recently would be when I was working for Bushfire Recovery Victoria. So post the fires, those horrendous fires of 2019, 2020 here in Australia, I met with a First Nation lady, and for her community, her role was the keeper of the yams. So these are generational original plants, and her part in culture was to make sure they continued. And the fire swept through her area and there was so many damaged trees that the policy was no one could go back in until all the trees had been certified safe, because the risk of a tree falling on them was high as they travelled into the area. So Auntie was taken off land because they evacuated. And then for 6 weeks, she was waiting to get back and check on the yam. And she was distraught. She had more of a commitment to her role in community than her own safety, but she couldn't get back there. And she was telling me this story, and I just asked her how that made her felt. And she said, I will rather die on my land, on my country next time than be taken off it. And I just looked at her and we both just started crying, like it was really emotional. And I thought, that was a really good policy to protect people. But all it needed was for someone on that roadblock, whether it was a police officer, a firefighter, to hear her and the importance of what she wanted to do. And they could have very easily escorted her on. She could have checked the yams and come off country. And I thought, we are so rigid in rules sometimes when we need flexibility, when people are grieving loss after an event. And that's really stayed with me. And she's inspired me. So when I went up to the 2022 floods in Northern Rivers, and I had a First Nation community team up there, and they came to me and said, we're doing some things wrong here. We're cleaning out Cabbage Tree Island before the community's ready. I said, well, what do you need me to do? And they said, just stop what everyone's doing until we can meet with community. So I asked everyone to not go into action mode. It was still raining. I just went out under an awning and met with the Land Council and just said, what do you need? And they said, well, what can you do? And I said, you tell me your need first, then I'll tell you what we can do. And all they wanted to do is have their community members present when the houses were being hosed out. And it was as easy as coordinating, okay, these are the times we'll be at each of these houses, and they just rotated people in so we didn't do more harm. And that's all inspired by sitting down and having a cup of tea with Auntie. So,
Megan, that question too, what do you need from me or what do you need from us, is such an important one. And I think it's not asked nearly enough. And how do we move people from this rigidity to this flexibility to ask that question in those situations?
I think the first success of listening to what the people of Cabbage Tree Island needed is having First Nation community team up there. So there's such a connection to country with our Indigenous community. Why would we not want to hear their needs if they're different to ours? Just as I don't want men having all the answers for women in my industry, why would I as a white woman want to have all the answers for them? So the fact that our community team had identified that and had a team up there. So I think reflecting your community in your workforce is really important. So you can listen and you can empathise. And then talking about it with our people, telling that story and why it's important. So the next person that comes along goes, I remember that story. I might ask that question. But, if I hadn't have met with Arnie, would I have been as tuned in to that need of my people saying, hey, can you stop what we're doing? Because we just, as firefighters, we went into action mode. But sometimes action does more harm. We need to sit, not have all the answers, like we said before, ask questions, then act.
And I think that comes actually back to the beginning of our conversation about that listening and ego and being really comfortable and confident with not having all the answers.
It works.
I think part of the work we do that we don't talk about very often is actually part of our role is leading others through grief. And if I think about, a time in my life that has been the hardest, or where I've kind of been brought to my knees, so to speak, has been where I've had to lead myself through grief because I've had somebody close die, and then had to try and lead in my work people, communities, my team members through grief. I've found that the trickiest leadership spot I've ever been in. That's, for me, the hardest. I'm interested in your reflections on that, and if you've had a moment where you've been brought to your knees in that way or in another way, and how you kind of stood up from that.
Probably the most pressure, I'll call it pressure, because whether that's an internal pressure or my own expectations, was I just got the role here in New South Wales. My wife and I were living in Victoria. I'd been commuting, and then my dad had a series of strokes, and he was in Brisbane. So I'm one of the most senior leaders in my organisation, brand new job, commuting to Victoria because Anna hadn't moved to Sydney yet, regularly getting to Brisbane, so I had no regrets with Dad, making sure I completed my relationship because I was distant. And I just felt like I was just zipping up and down the coastline of Australia, and I could never be everywhere at once. So to me, that was a lot of pressure because I wanted to be everywhere and I couldn't. And that was all about resilience for me, about, okay, how do I keep my energy up? How do I make sure all of my personal relationships are maintained, but I'm also present at work? And that was a really tough time for me. So it was a lot of self-care, make sure I had good sleep, I ate well. I knew it was a temporary spot I was in. So I think that's the other thing about resilience, is knowing that it's not a forever moment. And that puts it in perspective, I think, knowing I can do this for 12 months, I can do this for, 6 months, whatever it is that you're going through. It's just that we all go through phases in our life. And if you know, just be present in your current phase. Don't want to go backwards, don't want to go forwards, but just know it's not forever. I think that really helps with resilience and getting through those moments. Is that kind of how you got through your moment?
Yes. Covering those basics, eating well, sleeping well, all of those things cannot be underestimated. They sound so simple. You think, how can that be a big part of the answer? But definitely I focused on that. The other thing that I did is, because we're kind of going through life at such a terrific pace, especially with all of these events, and I was reminded of this when you were talking about all the events that you did in a year. Like, that's phenomenal, right? And so the pace of this work is intense. And I realized that I hadn't taken enough time to do that reflecting, that processing, that restoring, because I had just been so full on for so many years. So I started taking that time and writing, and I found writing about those experiences clarified my thinking and how I lead now, and really clarified my values. Also, it helped me reflect on, as you were saying, the voids, the bits that need some DIY, some attention, right? I think I've been rushing through all of these phases and so much, I hadn't done enough DIY, really. And so got stuck into that. And what that helped show me was actually, it's okay to be human. It's okay to err. We all do it. And to be aware of that and up for that, because that is where we learn, rather than beating myself up about it. And that gave me a lot of peace.
That made me laugh then when you said it's okay not to, not everything goes your way. The universe has a really wonderful way of leveling me out if I'm not being humble or I think I've got everything nailed. There's been many times in my life where the universe goes, you're not that good.
Oh my God, me too.
So I think that's really important, as part of that processing, is you got to have confidence in your strengths, but also know that there's growth areas in every part of your life. And our journey as a leader is you can't look after others if you're not looking after yourself, and just be humble but confident.
Yes.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. People think these are two different things. They're not. They go together.
You can be confident in your skill set. I've got a great skill set. I'm confident in that. But I also have to be humble that there will be people with better skill sets. There will be people who don't like my skill set. And that's, one of the best lessons. I was really trying to unpack something where I wasn't convincing someone I needed to influence to help me deliver something. And a friend of mine said, "You're not a preacher." And I said, "What?" And she was from Texas. And she said, "You're not here to convert people. You're not a preacher. So what you're doing is focusing on converting this person to the way you're thinking. But if you take a different angle and find out what their needs are, you'll actually influence them more than trying to convert them." And so that's a really good lesson for me when I'm thinking, why isn't that person getting me? They might never get me. My job's not here to convert you. It's just to do my job,
I've been in a similar position and haven't been able to get something across the line with decision makers, and things have gone really badly because of it. And then I think, I just didn't advocate well enough. It's my fault. Like, could I have done this better? Could I have influenced them better? Clearly I didn't do something right. Whereas now I think, like you, they may never have been convinced, maybe nothing, right? Like maybe they were just of a very different position or a different point in where they're at as a person. And so again, it comes back to that being humble, right? We do our best, but it's not all on our shoulders. It's not all about us.
I do think women have it harder when they're confident in their skill set. I think there's history that we carry that confident women are seen as braggers, whereas a confident man is just seen as a bit of swagger. So we're judged differently as female leaders when we're confident, I think. And I've worked out, I just walk my path.
I love that.
This is how I walk the planet. I'm not here to get your approval. I'll take your feedback if it's valid, but otherwise this is the way I go, and either get on the bus or get out of the way.
I love that. I'm going to take that one. I'm walking my path. I love that.
But I do it with good intent, right? So, do no harm. Everyone deserves 5 minutes. Don't white people. Be confident. Know your stuff, but be good at your stuff to match your confidence, and then just deliver. And, some people will like it and some people won't.
Yeah. And the look out for the cosmic pull your head in.
Yeah, you've got to be attuned to it, and you go, yes, there's my lesson.
Like, I didn't learn the first time. Really? I have to learn this again.
Yeah.
Megan, thank you so much for such an incredible chat. I was so excited about it. I have been watching and inspired by your leadership and our conversations over many years. So thank you for being generous with your time, and I'm so looking forward to what you make happen next. And thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Kia ora.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening. A little reminder, if you enjoyed this podcast, please help us out and subscribe, rate and review us on your favourite platform. Even better, share it with someone in your network who might find it interesting. This podcast is produced by Disastrous. You can find out more at disastrous.co and join our newsletter for resources and content from this episode. Join us next time for another Disrupting Disasters.